Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Hey, listen, I wanted to ask you about this right out of the gate. The Intercept reported on this, and the headline was pretty startling. It said secret text in Senate bill would give FBI warrantless access to email records. And they said it was a provision that was snuck into secret text of a Senate annual intelligence authorization bill that would give the FBI the ability to demand individuals' email data and possibly web surfing history from their service providers without a warrant and complete secrecy. Do you know anything about this?
I saw the story, and I'm very concerned about it. The intelligence bill has not come forward, and I'm usually the one that holds it to look at it and actually read the bill. And so, I haven't yet talked to my staff about it since I saw that story, but we will be looking at that, and there's no way we'll let something like that go through without a fight.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at here, Senator Paul, is are they still playing this game? I mean, are we really still having this conversation? I don't think anybody wants the FBI not to have the information it needs when it's chasing down terrorists and criminals. You've said as much yourself. But are we really still playing this game that our law enforcement needs to have access to our emails without us knowing and without us being a suspect in a crime? I mean, good Lord.
You have to be incredibly observant because every time you look away, they will take more power. And so, for example, we have a bill out there with Mike Lee as a lead sponsor on this, and I'm a co-sponsor as well, that would protect your email, because right now your email after 6 months is free game for the government without any kind of warrant or subpoena, including the content after 6 months. And so we have a bill to amend that and say you have to have a judge's warrant. But meanwhile, that's the public fight we're having.
Right.
Privately, they will do everything possible to stick into bills, unbeknownst to legislators and to the public. They will try to grab more power because they have not learned their lesson from this. They are not reformed, and they think that because they see themselves as good people, there should be no limits on what they can do.
Well, and I think what's most disturbing about this is like FBI Director James Comey. He's a guy that actually was part of a very interesting story where he raced to the bedside of John Ashcroft, the Attorney General at the time when Bush was president, in order to stop an expansion of what he considered to be abusive, warrantless surveillance. And he was critical in actually bringing that to a stop. It concerns me.
And yet he and Clapper have worked together and presided over the collection of millions and millions of Americans' phone data without our knowledge, and in fact explicitly told us they weren't doing it. So I wish he were more conscious and more cognizant of our rights and more in the defense of them. He's also the one advocating for a super warrant now, and this super warrant would say that you are commanded to do whatever the government says to obtain information for them. So not just producing your records, but you are commanded to create new software. If you're Apple, you are commanded to create new software to do something that you're at this time currently unable to do.
And this would fix the problem, if you want to call it that they had with Apple the last time around, because encryption's only going to get more and more strong as a result of that fight. So they need to be able to compel these companies to do it, and that would be unprecedented, wouldn't it, in our nation's history to compel a company?
Yeah, but it doesn't really fix the problem. What it does is just creates another set. So when you chase people, they go further and further underground. And the FBI doesn't quite get this, that everyone is reacting to what they're doing. So what happens is if they force Apple, they say, we will put you in jail if you don't figure out a way to get into your software, then that vulnerability to the software will be open to foreign governments like China and Russia, also to terrorists, also to thieves. And then what happens is if you're a terrorist, what do now? You don't depend on the phone. You go to what's called WhatsApp, which is peer-to-peer encryption, and there is no stopping that.
Right.
And so what they do is they force all the law-abiding. It's in some ways similar to gun control. Gun control works for law-abiding citizens, but doesn't work for criminals.
Right.
And same way with encryption. If they ban encryption, normal businesses and lawful businesses that need privacy in their transactions, or just individuals who want transactions to be private, will no longer be private, but the criminals will just go to another country, go to another software application, and continue to evade it. What we really need is more human intelligence. I told the FBI director this recently. I'll vote for more FBI agents for you. I want you to do more targeted investigation of threats to our country. I just don't want you investigating all Americans indiscriminately.
Right. Yeah, and what ends up happening, to your point, is you have law-abiding citizens who've done no wrong, have nothing to hide, that still even if subconsciously, are walking around as if they're suspects, because that's essentially what it makes those law-abiding citizens feel like. And and like you said, the criminals, they're going to go even farther to ground, so they're still going to get away with doing whatever it was they were doing. The only outcome is you've made everyone feel like a criminal, and you've subjugated everyone to this sort of Orwellian idea that the government needs to know everything you're thinking and everything you're doing.
It also puts a damper on free speech and association in the sense that even now, people who are afraid to be involved in politics because they're afraid they'll be audited. Well, I can't specify that I have the proof the IRS is doing it. There are a lot of indications that the IRS went after conservative Tea Party groups, and every day, anecdotally, someone comes up to me and says, I gave to your campaign and now I'm being audited.
Wow.
And
wow.
They fear that the IRS is targeting them for their political beliefs, but then couple that with the idea that you're going to let a government search through, and the IRS does this too, search through reams and reams of data, phone data, tracking you down in an attempt to punish you, and doing this all the while without any permission from a judge.
Yeah. Now, a lot of this stuff happens. You talked about being incredibly vigilant. The Intercept in this case is the website that's run by the guy who broke the Snowden story. And they kind of keep an eye on a lot of this type of privacy type stuff. But it's impossible for the average citizen to be as vigilant, and yet it's even becoming more and more impossible for senators and legislators to be as vigilant as they need to be because of how rushed some of these bills are when they're working their way through Congress. You've actually sponsored a piece of legislation that would force the Senate to give you time to look at bills. Tell me what's going on with that.
I have a bill that I've introduced called Read the Bills Act, and every time I bring this up, people kind of chuckle as if, it's a joke to make them read the bills. Certainly they read the bills. But that is a problem. And so what I've said is that we ought to wait one day for every 20 pages. So if you got a 2,000-page Obamacare, you'd have a 100 days waiting period, and you'd have time to read the bill. This just came up this last week. I stood up, and they all got mad at me because they wanted to rush through this new federal regulation of chemicals, and it's sweeping. It preempts state regulations and will be something that we will not go back on. And I said, look, I want to read this, and I want to at least have a public discussion over what you're doing here. And they all got mad. They wanted to celebrate. They wanted to put this thing through without any discussion, debate, or even a vote. And I just said, no, we're going to have to take a week to read it. I've been reading it over the weekend, and I'm going to give a speech on this next week when we go back, talking about how there is a certain amount of irony that businesses now are all clamoring for federal regulation because they don't like state regulation.
Right.
But the danger is if you preempt a state you don't like California, you may well also preempt a low regulatory state like Texas, and then there will be no home for you eventually, because once it becomes federal, there is no incentive. And this set of regulations actually forbids the analysis of cost. So you're not even allowed to take into account the cost of the regulation. You're specifically forbidden from doing that, and that's precisely a recipe for overzealous regulators.
It's interesting you bring this up because there's actually a parallel to this in the current lawsuit by 12 states going against the federal government's overreach on the transgender bathroom executive order or whatever you want to call it. It actually wasn't an executive order that the president pushed out, but it was just an edict. And Kentucky is now joining that. Governor Matt Bevin is joining that. There'll be now 12 states suing the federal government. Here in Kentucky, we've got several schools that have handled the transgender bathroom issue on their own without federal government input by establishing a gender-neutral restroom. It hasn't been a problem. That's not good enough for the federal government. They've come in and said that they want transgender students to be able to choose which bathroom they go to. Is this an example of that kind of federal overreach where the one-size-fits-all does not do well in each of the individual communities that are served by it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason for the federal government to be involved in, bathroom assignments for schools. Schools can figure this out. When they had sort of unusual situations, the schools were able to figure it out at a local level. But, the thing is that the federal government cannot and will, create havoc if they're going to have 12-year-old girls in a boy's shower with them, or vice versa, or 45-year-old men who think they're 12-year-old girls in the girls' shower. I mean, it leads to chaos if you have no rules at all. And if the federal government imposes this anarchy. So I think there will be a problem. But I think Kentuckians will, by and large, reject this.
Last week there was a startling statement and we're talking with Senator Rand Paul, a startling statement by the head of the VA, Bob McDonnell, who by all accounts is a great guy. I just couldn't believe he actually phrased it this way. He was at a breakfast, and he said he compared the wait times for our veterans with Disney. Disney fired back, and he said, Disney doesn't care about the wait times. It's just about the overall experience, which, I mean, that was just roundly rejected by pretty much everybody in America. These guys are waiting for life-saving treatment in our veteran situation, and it's kind of unbelievable somebody would make that comparison. They've apologized and walked that back a little bit, but in a way, you look at what's happened with the VA scandal. We've really let our military guys and gals down, and we just came through Memorial Day weekend. We remembered those that actually gave every measure of full devotion to our country, and in the lead up to that, a statement like that from a bureaucrat was just harmful to the process, wasn't it?
Yeah, I find it insulting, and the whole VA scandal has been an insult to veterans, and it disappoints me, but doesn't surprise me about our federal government that we can't do things better. But really, when you have people who are not doing their job, they need to be relieved. We found out that the VA administrators who were lying about the process and saying nobody was really in a waiting line really haven't been relieved to this day. We actually had to pass special legislation saying, yes, we can fire these people, and then still nobody fired people. In fact, they shuffle them around to different jobs and try to hide the P, and nobody ends up, it's a game of hiding the shell or hiding the P. Nobody ends up seeing where these people go, but nobody ever gets rid of them, and nothing ever improves. And this is a problem with the federal government. You have the wrong incentives, bad people are rewarded, and no one is punished. I've actually tried to introduce a bill that would allow good employees to be rewarded. It's called bonuses for cost cutters. And with that bill, we just got it passed out of committee. It would give federal employees bonuses for finding savings and turning money back in if they don't spend.
What a novel idea. Hey, it must have come from the private sector. Senator Paul, appreciate your time this morning, sir.
Thanks, Evan.